what could be an amorphous topic, but I feel like will be much less so after the next 35 minutes, which we've been allotted. The topic is advancing human consciousness and practical ethics in the era preceding AGI. I mentioned they could mean a great many things, and everybody will have a different perspective. We had 3 initial conversation topics. We might only make it through 2, but I want to give us as much discourse as we can around the themes that we have listed. Before we do, I'll give everybody the 20-second quick snippet around the table, sort of what makes this theme sort of your domain of expertise, and then after which we'll dive right into question number 1 around creating a foundation for AGI integration. So without further ado, by all means, Julie, if you don't mind kicking us off.
Right, and you're asking me to give a brief bio?
Yeah. The fast 20-second version that folks can kind of tune into.
Yeah. Well, I founded an institute called the Institute for Love and Time. It's a nonprofit. It's about creating technology that brings unconditional love through time, which I think is important for everyone on the planet, including non-humans, and the planet itself. And my background's in cognitive neuroscience and technology / thinking about technology, designing technology, and leading innovation in technology. And that's who I am.
All right, fantastic. Mikey, if you don't mind.
Hey everyone, my name is Mikey Siegel, and I did my graduate work looking at human-robot interaction at the MIT Media Lab, and I've spent the last 10, 12 years or so looking at the ways we can use modern technology to support the developmental process of humanity, to support the elevation of human consciousness, human connection, the opening of the human heart, the opening of the human mind. And I'm deeply of the belief that if we can resolve the inner conflicts of humanity, then we can resolve the outer conflicts of humanity, and that's vital for the AI conversation.
It's going to be vital for our conversation here too, Mikey. So glad to have you with us. Gabriel, if you don't mind, just a quick background.
Hi, my name is Gabriel Axel-Montes. I'm a neuroscientist by training, and I'm working in AI industry these days, merging consciousness, psychology, neuroscience with AI through prompt engineering, designing apps that help people go into different states of consciousness, as that's basically my passion. These days, have a greater interest in asking how do we bring that to the collective level and bringing about beneficial AGI at a wider scale. So happy to be here.
All right. Leslie, I got to hear a bit of your wisdom in the dinner when we first arrived, but for the folks that don't know, a quick backdrop before we get into questions.
Well, my background is in psychology and technology and neurology early on in my life, but I'm old now. And I've taught at several universities, including Saybrook and most recently the California Institute of Integrative Studies, from which I've recently retired. And over the course of my career, I've gradually drifted from technology to neuropsychology to biopsychology and then into consciousness studies. And the last few years I've been mostly involved in consciousness studies. My book, A Radiance of Being, has won several awards, and also my book, Consciousness Explained Better, has won a few awards. And so that's me. I'm interested in consciousness. I have a background in technology, but nothing to brag about. It's just that I understand some of the issues.
We'll need it to be explained better by the end of this 30 minutes, so hopefully you can crunch in a little bit of that. I've got the tough job of keeping us on time here, which is my shebang.
Oh, please do. I'd like to be on time.
By all means. We've got a first question around sort of what does it look like to create a foundation for responsible AGI integration. So this will obviously be a grand shift technologically. We've talked about sort of love for non-human minds, which I think will be an interesting place to kick us off. When we think about what would such a foundation look like, we're about to sort of see some pretty radical shifts. What should we think about doing ahead of time? Julie, we can kick off with you in terms of how you nutshell that question, that theme.
Do you want us to go in order?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll save time.
Now,
again.
4 minutes a pop, so I'll try to raise my hand if we need to.
I guess it's debatable, or actually you could probably prove whether or not going in the known order actually saves time, but we'll just go with that theory.
We will.
I think at the foundation, the question, the foundation has to be a question, which is why are we doing this? Why are we creating AI? What is it in us that creates AI? And an acknowledgement that the answer is multidimensional. So it is not simply arrogance, like, ooh, we want to create more humans, but we don't want to have sex or something. And it's not simply stupidity, let's create something that destroys us. But those things are there. But it's also aspirational. How can we continue to evolve who human beings are? And it's also teaching us who we are, in the sense of what Jeffrey was talking about earlier, letting us know that we really do have this fear of losing control, and that we will be demonstrating to ourselves that the control that we fear losing was never ours in the first place. And so I think if you start with that question, then the foundation can grow organically.
So for you, posing that question frankly around should we be thinking about this as control, why is it that we're creating this in the first place, sort of having a consensus level grasp societally around this would be an important first step.
Just an awareness of what are all the reasons for which we are creating AI. I mean, like, not what it should be. I really like David Brin's approach of this whole should thing is kind of a disaster. Not what it should be, but what is the reality of the answers to those questions, to that question? What are the real diversity of answers to that question? Just taking stock, almost like a taxonomy of human thought around why we are creating AI. Just being aware of that. That's a really good first step.
Got it, a baseline. Mikey, from your vantage point, a foundation for AGI, what would be crucial to get done ahead of this wave?
I appreciate what Julia is saying, and I feel like what she's pointing towards is an inquiry-based process. And when we ask questions and we're curious, there's a possibility for learning. There's a possibility for growth. There's a possibility for seeing what was previously unseen. And I feel like that's one of the most critical things that's needed. And I'll basically say what Julia said in my own words. I do want to make a correction. I'm no longer a lecturer at Stanford University, but I was for a number of years. And while I was there, I created a course called Designing for Wellbeing. A really cool course, collaborated with a couple of other instructors, and the course was taught to a wide variety of students, from the business school to the medical school to design, and the course had a core theme. And the theme was the relationship between who we are and what we build. And the point was that you can't actually separate the biases, the unseen, unconscious baggage, the shadows, the hopes, the dreams, what it is that you could call it the intentionality, the quality of psyche of the designer from what they create, for better or worse. And it's the for worse that we need to be concerned with, because we are essentially birthing a new mind into being. And if we, as the creators of that new mind, don't deeply examine our own unseen biases, then we will be essentially recreating the same conflicts, the same disparity, the same disconnect that we already have on this planet, except we're going to be giving it an unimaginable power. And the question is, what do we want to be empowering? And I think we can all agree that the qualities that we want to empower are closer to compassion, love, wisdom. And so if that's what we want to build, then the invitation is to all of us, me included, to devote our lives to embodying that just as much as we would devote our lives to our skill as an engineer, or our skill as a designer, or our skill as a business person.
And just for clarity, Mikey, raising consciousness in a minute. I'm going to pass to Gabriel, but do you see any distinction at all between sort of this idea of rising consciousness, which is wildly vague, and sort of the cultivation of love and compassion intentionally, or do you see those inherently as one? Because I can see some people arguing maybe you can consciously do other things, but what are your thoughts?
I want to just clear up, just for conversation's sake in this conference, because there's a lot of interest in this word consciousness, I just want to make a distinction. Consciousness can be just a very technical term, an important term, but a technical term. Hitler was a conscious being, right? As is the Dalai Lama, a conscious being. An anesthesiologist is concerned with consciousness, because you certainly don't want someone to be conscious as you operate on them. So there's this question, can AI be conscious? Which is a vital and important one, and that's what the hard problem of consciousness is concerned with. And there's a connected but distinct exploration, which is more of a developmental process. And this developmental process is what the mystics and sages and spiritual leaders for thousands of years have been pointing us as a humanity towards. And that developmental process is one towards realizing and embodying a deeper truth and understanding about the nature of reality. And we call that wisdom, we call that compassion, we call that love. And so it's good to distinguish between those things.
Yeah, I feel like the etymology of sort of the beginning of this talk is sort of necessary, so I appreciate it. Gabriel, if you don't mind, the answer to that question of what we should do to set the foundation before AGI integration.
Yeah, so I just want to envelope and incorporate the brilliant insights so far. No disagreements. I think building on these truths, open inquiry, modeling ourselves, the kind of, where these questions are leading, the kind of wisdom principles, the cultivation of consciousness. In a sense, throughout evolution, we've been externalizing our cognition into the environment, right? In a sense, we've produced these tools, and they then, over time, aggregate to produce architecture, collective artifacts, individual artifacts, art, computers, AI, and so on. And we're kind of seeing that, to a degree, what we create is dependent on the things we're trying to do as a civilization, an ordinary, just a normal level. And that is going to shape what we're creating, and we're sort of birthing something now collectively. And there's in the beginning of the conference, we talked about the different sort of quasi-factions, effective accelerationism and all this. And these are temporary, and they're sort of tribalized ways of looking at AGI development. Point being is this externalization we're doing is based upon our prior history so far. And right now we have, large population, complex societies, people being exposed to each other's viewpoints in ways that maybe before were not so common through algorithmic social media. So this is all to say that AGI, by default, let's assume it's going to be Moloch. I mean, just looking at our foundations. So this is kind of founded on this drive to feed upon, right? So zero sum, negative sum. So we're a small collective of all the people in the world that are designing and working on AI and would-be AGI. So building on the previous comments, how can we model in ourselves what the ideal AGI is that we want to build? So how can we start modeling that in ourselves? And there's a lot. This speaks to the education piece, which we'll hopefully talk about later. In conferences and so on, people have their own viewpoints, and they kind of, can them up, you throw them out. And there isn't a lot of integration of that and synthesis of that. So one really big question will be, post-conference, what are we gonna do? Is it just gonna be another conference next year? And we'll update our, everyone on our work, our latest things? Or is there gonna be an ongoing process of collaborating consciously, looking at our biases, having done some cultivation? And these matters that have been talked about by Jeffrey and others about developers and their kind of involvement in some of these practices, really great questions. How about doing that, doing these practices, going into these coding settings, and also not just the AI developers, but them too, and others, going into collaboration brainstorm sessions where it's like, okay, we have done some of this work, we've experienced other modes of consciousness, and what kind of solutions can be generated from thinking at that wavelength. Also, most people that are interested in AI, the people that are drawn to these conferences, whether it's beneficial AGI, decentralized, all that is, are going to be people that are kind of more cognitive, doing a lot of meditation and thinking, and that's important because you're designing and doing coding. And something I've been talking to people in the conference about is, so I'm a dad, right? That's like my main thing in life now, 3-year-old, 1-year-old, 2 boys. Before I was a dad, if I would have heard the kids running around this conference at the dinner and now, it would have taken me out of phase, like, oh, that's sort of something else, right? But having been a dad and having to open my bandwidth to like the children and their voice and everything, that's helped me to open my bandwidth so I can process both at once. And that's I think that's a beautiful thing. If you get out of phase when you have to process like that, the heart and the mind, that's an interesting point to observe, and can we integrate those two together and be there at once instead of shifting out of phase? So I'll pause there.
Yeah. I feel like we're going to unpack that a little bit deeper in the next question, so I appreciate you cracking open. Leslie, not your first time contemplating these questions. I would love to know your thoughts about what a strong foundation before integration looks like.
Here's a question. What is it like to be an ATI?
I have no idea.
Well, that's a question about consciousness. Here's a comment from Chuggum Trumpa. Don't worry, nothing's under control. Okay, my wife is the realist in my family, so I will be very brief, but I want to speak to regulation into the future. I hope that the people and companies and entities that are involved in developing advanced AGI can work with or align with UNESCO's AGI standards, and some organizations are already working, and a number of countries are working with AGI standards, ethics, and goals. So I want to just say, yes, let's get on board as much as we can with UNESCO's policies and standards in the countries that are working with it, and many of them. Ideally, it's probably not too realistic, but ideally I'd love to see something emerge sort of like Plato's Academy, which would be an organization made up of people who are sophisticated in AGI, but also in terms of their humanism, their development, and so on. So they would be special people in a way. But in order to join this group, you would have to qualify technically and perhaps in terms of your own moral and personal background. That's idealistic, of course, but UNESCO's got stuff going right now that we can get on board with if we're not already. That's about all I have to say.
We've got half a second to dive into it. This idea of Plato's Academy, the idea of selecting people based on their moral traits, it's going to be a tough gig. Somebody's got to play the role of the grand vizier of virtue to be able to select the others. But let's just presume that could be you, Leslie. It seems like on this stage. I trust you.
Always comes up, that question always comes up.
As it should, in all frankness. But to that point, what would you see, what would be your goal? Assuming that could happen, I think it is a noble dream. Assuming that could happen, we could have an academy of that kind, merging the technical with kind of these ideal traits we hope for. Would you aim for those folks to make their way into kind of the AGI labs that are going to birth this thing, to governance? What would be your hope for that?
I think they would, as I'm thinking of it, I haven't really thought about it that much, but they would write standards, they would provide instruction, tutoring, they would help develop technologies that are human positive, so that it would be not a policing organization, but an organization that would offer guidance and help indifferently to people all over the world. And I think it would have to be really important that everybody's involved. I mean, we have to get China involved, for example. I don't know, North Korea would be a tough case, but I think we need diplomats that would bring people together from everywhere. Thank you.
I guess with that said, you know, if we think about, I think it's interesting to posit sort of the beginning and the end of this idea of philosopher king sort of that you're conjuring here is one that I feel like there's more noodling to be done on. The next question is around lifting consciousness. We started with asking the right questions. We've gone into a little bit, Mikey, to your point, being able to cultivate these proper traits, which in your vantage point, you know, would aid us in our cause. Julie, I'll pass it to you here. When you think about how we could lift consciousness in the way that you define that between now and AGI, what would be those most important issues from your view?
Yeah, I'm just going to quickly define lifting consciousness
By all means, please.
as bringing people through the actual natural developmental process that we have that is ingrained with us, that involves a movement eventually towards self-transcendence. So that's how I define lifting consciousness. In terms of how to do that as we start to integrate with AI, or AI even before AGI, actually, the bridge to AGI integration, I think, is relationship. So I think one of the things that's not well designed, so AIs have all sorts of interesting designs, attempts at AGI have all sorts of interesting designs, humans have all sorts of interesting designs, but the relationship between humans and AIs, humans and eventual AGI, needs to be thoughtfully designed. And so I think that thinking about how to design that relationship from the point of view of how to develop humans and also from the point of view about how to develop AGI, so that that relationship itself is optimal, is something that we really need to think about. I think that's what helps us integrate, is to understand that this relationship is actually generative. So the relationship actually creates new ideas, new development on both sides. And so thinking about the relationship, and of course, I'm going to say, how love can enter into that relationship is key.
On the one hand, I feel like we can clap it up if you guys like to, but I'm interested in this notion. Do you think that such this integration of love and intentionality of relationship, which is still somewhat amorphous now, we should expect this to bubble up automatically from the labs who are currently most likely to birth the deity, or do you think this love would have to be imposed from the outside? Which I sort of wonder. I wonder how loving that is. What's your vantage point?
Well, I think the kind of love I'm talking about is unconditional love, or agape, or universal love. So it's almost like, I think of it like electricity or a natural force. So you don't impose it from outside; it is always present. The question is, are you capable in your current development of accessing that? And if someone isn't capable in their current development, that's okay. They can become capable to access that, and that's wonderful. So it's a matter of, so in terms of practical, I know you're trying to get at practical things, but I mean, no, I think we should try. But that you can practically bootstrap both humanity, the development of humanity and the development of AGI by pinging off each other. So building AIs that ask you questions about humanity in an inquiry-based process, being a human who is willing to answer those questions and then ask the AI questions, and you ping off of each other. You're developing a ladder or a bridge, or both, a laddery bridge, towards what's next.
Okay, we've got about 3.5 minutes a pop, so I'm gonna move through. Mikey, I hope that you can meditate hard enough to beam that electricity to San Francisco and London before the god is birthed. But why don't you take it away here on what you think we ought to do?
Yeah, wow.
In preparation.
I've got about 3 hours of an answer, so
I can
let me
imagine.
try and condense that down. So first, again, just love riffing off Julie here, because I do think the relational quality and the depth of that relational quality is so important here. And I'll just plant like a sci-fi vision, which I think we actually really could accomplish. And it's a concept that this Zen teacher, Soryu for All, coined, this idea of the startup ashram. And the vision is of a well-funded group of the best developers, the best thinkers, philosophers coming together with the intention to create the next version of this AGI. And they integrated just as much of a developmental process as into their own personal development and collective development as they did into the technical development. And a real experiment in exploring this relationship between who we are and what we build. And I think that there's a possibility for some kind of almost skunkworks type lab that's exploring that relationship between consciousness and the development of AGI. And I'm talking fast because there's like 9 points I want to make. I'm just going to make one more,
Okay, please.
which is that I think that something needs to happen to better integrate these ideas into this technical developmental process. And the thing that needs to happen is the demystifying of the mystical, of the de-wooing of the spiritual. Because what we're actually talking about is just a more clear understanding of the nature of reality. It's something that every scientist wants, it's something that every engineer wants. We all want the same thing. And when one has an insight, what it's called in Buddhism and other spiritual traditions, when you have an insight, like an aha moment, all that's happening is you're seeing through what was previously confusion or delusion or ignorance, which we all have to some extent. And you're getting it. You're getting what reality is about at a deeper level. And that's it. And if we can understand that when we're confused, then we create from a place of confusion and we risk bringing more confusion into the world. And when we have more clarity and understanding about the nature of reality, well, then we're better able to be compassionate, we're better able to be kind, we're out of our own way, and we're better able to create things that are of service. And so if we make this more about clearing delusion and coming into clarity, which is another word for wisdom, then it's a more accessible thing to this kind of world.
I'll just ask from time check if I could. We used to have a clock right I appreciate that, Mike. You suspect that as we pass to Gabriel, that the open AIs and deep minds of the world are confused. And if they had the wisdom that you have, they would be less confused. And they would be able to do more good if they were able to rise to your level of understanding of the universe.
No, I disagree because I'm also confused.
Okay.
Maybe I'm a little less confused about my own confusion. Maybe that's the most I could possibly
I think that's
say.
admirable. I think that's admirable.
But what I will say absolutely is that we're collectively confused. This is why we're killing each other. This is why we can even commit the acts of violence on each other that we do. How could you do that? If you weren't confused, how could you have such a distorted distribution of resources? How could people be suffering in this way if we were not confused?
Amen.
Right? These are solvable problems, and we're not solving them because of our confusion, our disconnection, our fear, our greed. So unquestionably, yes, we're all confused. And so the answer is an enthusiastic yes. If OpenAI and if these other companies were less confused and they were able to build from a clear, heart-centered wisdom, then yes, we would be building miraculous things.
If they could but rise to your level. Gabriel, if you don't mind, your vantage point on what it would look like to lift consciousness. We've had a couple approaches here. Ahead of AGI, what would that look like in practice for you? Or what do you think are initiatives that maybe the room should understand?
Great question. Trying to compress the answer just a little bit. Love the first point made by Julia about the relationship and the bootstrapping. It's going to be important. The thought came to mind that with smartphones, and people are always asking, what's the killer app? And now the question is like, what's the killer app for AI? And I think it's fundamentally different because an app is, you wouldn't necessarily call it very intelligent unless you're, really breaking things down. Whereas AI, we can start talking about intelligence, and you use an app, but humans are intelligent. You don't use a human. Like So I think with AI, it's going to be probably something more like this, where you're in a relationship with it. And you're not giving people products per se. And there will be that, and it's going to be people building it in a relationship and going on that way. In terms of consciousness development, micro practices are great. You don't have to be a monk. You don't have to then or stop or not even enter practices. There's all sorts of clues everywhere. So if you look at old photos of shamans in old books, their eyes are usually everted to the side a little bit. That's because they're accessing an extraordinary vessel of Chinese medicine, which has to do with going into sort of other realms of visioning. And so you could just go and say, oh great, we're gonna research that and understand that. Does AI need to, and you can see it in kabuki theater as well, where they twist their eyes and they're entering realms, and that's the realm of deities and so on. So those are really interesting insights, and that's like an analytical scientific approach to practices and observing and seeing. So people doing things like that is quite fascinating. On the other hand, maybe AGI could help us skip a lot of that research and tell us, hey, like, don't worry about doing all this publicly funded lab research. Let's help, we'll help give you some answers. So the sky's the limit, and there's a lot more that is hard to pin down in a very short amount of time. There's realms of consciousness that we can talk about another time.
Micro practice is a term worth Googling. I've been longing to leave the cave, and I hope, Leslie, that by the end of this, jumping off the stage, I can do just that. Would you mind letting us know how to get out?
Developing a human consciousness and spirituality is a long and tedious process. It tends to distract one from technological activities at the same time. So we're back to my Plato's Academy idea of finding people of quality and inviting them already. These are people with compassion, wisdom, and so on. And then when you get the group together, let's get Jeffrey to come down and run a program so that we can be living in the present, which would be a good idea. That's my hit on it. There's no easy other answer. I'm sorry.
And again, your hope would be that those folks would then populate the governments and sort of these.
I think if you had something like this going, people would come from everywhere.
All right. Well, I
You're just going to have to sort them out when they come in the door, but they have the right motivation.
There's certainly a hope for that. There's many trillions to compete with the existing players on the field, but I also think we've got a noble vision here. So let's.
Well, the great teachers attract great students, and I think something like this would be as a social effort would attract a lot of people.
You got to find your Aristotle, my good man. Leslie, Gabriel, Michael, and Julia, thank you all so much for being able to share your insights with me.
Thank you.